Welcome to our channel, Magnifica TV, dedicated to offering the news of the Church. Today is Wednesday, July 27, and these are our headlines. The Holy See has issued a statement of warning the German Synod of risk of provoking the breakup of the Church if they approve changes on their own. The German response to the statement of the Holy See was immediately. They expressed their surprise and irritation at the document and rejected the accusations. The Pope has published a document that modifies some aspects of Opus Dei's legislation, among which is that its prelate may not be named bishop. The opposition on the communist dictatorship in Cuba has expressed its discomfort with the Pope's statement about his friendship with Raúl Castro. The U.S. bishops have sharply criticized President Biden's law guaranteeing abortion at any time of pregnancy, including delivery. The German Synod has already been warned by Rome. If they approve changes on their own in a structure or doctrine, they will provoke a schism in the Church.
The Holy See has intervened in the German synodal way with a statement published in the early afternoon of Thursday, July 21st. The content of the statement is very clear. The Church in Germany cannot adopt new forms of government or change doctrine and morals, because it would be a threat to the unity of the Church. In order to protect the freedom of the people of God and the exercise of the episcopal ministry, it seems necessary to make it clear that the synodal way in Germany is not authorized to force the bishops and the faithful to adopt new forms of government and new orientations of doctrine and morals. It would not be permissible to introduce new structures or official doctrines in dioceses before agreement has been reached at the level of the universal Church, which would represent a wound to ecclesial communion and a threat to the unity of the Church, the statement adds. The statement goes on to quote the words of Pope Francis in his 2019 letter to German Catholics: "The universal Church lives in and from the particular churches, just as the particular churches live and flourish in and from the universal Church. As if they are separated from the whole ecclesial body, they weaken, rot, and die. Hence, the necessity of always keeping communion with the whole body of the Church alive and effective." Therefore, the statement concludes, "It is hoped that the proposals of the way of the path of the particular churches in Germany will converge in the synodal path followed by the universal Church for a mutual enrichment and a witness to that unity by which the body of the Church manifests its fidelity to Christ the Lord." The statement is neither signed nor addressed to anyone in particular, although it has been published in the official bulletin of the Church and bears the title Statement of the Holy See. This makes this document totally unusual.
The leaders of the German Synod were quickly to publish a response to the Vatican statement, expressing surprise and irritation about it.
The presidents of the Synodal Way, Bishop George Batzing and Mrs. Statter-Karp, have expressed clear criticism of the Holy See's statement, published by surprise on Thursday, on the reform process of the Catholic Church in Germany. The nature of today's communication causes them astonishment. The president of the German Bishops' Conference and the chairwoman of the Central Committee of German Catholics said Thursday evening in a joint statement. And further, It does not testify to a good style of communication within the Church that unsigned statements are published. In the statement, they insist that the Apostolic Nuncio in Germany has been invited to participate in the reform process on a permanent basis. Furthermore, the Presidium of the Synodal Way has, from the beginning, endeavored to find direct channels of communication with the Roman authorities. Unfortunately, the German communique adds, the Synodal Presidium has not been invited to a discussion to date. We regret with irritation that this direct communication has not taken place so far. In our understanding, a synodal church is different. This also applies to the current form of communication, which astonishes us, they say, referring to the fact that the Vatican statement does not bear a signature. In addition, Batzing and Stederkarp also rejected the content of the Holy See's declaration. We never tire of emphasizing that the Church in Germany will not follow a special German path. Nevertheless, we consider it our duty to state clearly the changes we consider necessary. In doing so, we already feel that the problems and issues we name are similar throughout the world. The Holy See statement will be discussed by the German Synod at the meeting to be held in September.
By decision of the Pope, the prelate of the Opus Dei will not be a bishop and will not be able to wear the episcopal insignia as of August 4th.
Pope Francis's motu proprio ad charismam tuendum modifies several articles of the Apostolic Constitution Ocit of St. John Paul II, which erected the prelature of Opus Dei, to adapt them to the recent Apostolic Constitution Predicatio Evangelium on the Roman Curia. Almost 40 years after the Apostolic Constitution Occi, with which St. John Paul II erected the prelature of Opus Dei, Pope Francis has partially modified it. The purpose of this motu proprio, which will take effect on August 4th, is, on the one hand, to safeguard the charism of Opus Dei and to promote the evangelizing action that its members carry out in the world, that is, to spread the call to holiness in the world through the sanctification of work. The Pope transfers the competencies for Opus Dei from the dicastery for bishops to that of the clergy, provides that the prelate will not be invested with episcopal orders, nor can they wear episcopal insignia, and establishes that the statutes of the prelature will be suitably adapted, at the proposal of the prelature itself, for approval by the Apostolic See.
In one of his last interviews, the Pope spoke of his friendship with communist dictator Raúl Castro. The Cuban opposition has expressed its discomfort.
The Assembly of the Cuban Resistance, a platform of organizations opposed to the communist regime inside and outside the island, has strongly criticized Pope Francis's lack of empathy towards Cuban political prisoners. With pain and surprise, the Resistance refers in a letter to the interview the Pope gave a few days ago to Mexican journalists, in which he spoke of his human relations with former Cuban President Raúl Castro. In his statements, there were no words of charity and encouragement for the more than 700 political prisoners, for the Cuban mothers, for the children and husbands of the 77 women detained for more than a year, for the children as young as 12 years old interned in re-education schools, for the minors in political prison and condemned to work in forced labor camps. Freedom is a divine gift that no tyranny has the right to take away from a people, continues the letter, which also reproaches Francis for the lack of recognition of the risk that Some priests, nuns, and seminarians in Cuba are suffering for accompanying their people in their claims for freedom. Freedom, this we ask for our political prisoners, for our imprisoned youth. You know, Holy Father, that in Cuban prisons there are at this moment men and women of faith who, like those who were killed before the firing squad by the dictatorship, shouting Viva Cuba Libre, Viva Cristo Rey, need words of encouragement from your church to resist a terrible injustice.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has criticized a bill proposed by Biden and passed by the Congress that will expand access to abortion.
The Women's Health Protection Act, which the House passed on a 219-210 vote Friday, is the most unjust and radical abortion on demand bill our nation has ever seen, Archbishop William Lowry of Baltimore and Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York wrote in a statement. Responding to the needs of women by promoting taxpayer-funded elective abortion, as this bill would do, is a grave evil and a failure to love and serve women, the bishop said. Providing free or low-cost abortions, rather than increasing the resources women need to care for themselves and their children, is not choice, but coercion and callous neglect, they said. Because Democrats lack the votes needed to overcome Republican opposition, the bill is not expected to pass in the Senate. The Women's Health Protection Act would force Americans to fund abortion with tax dollars and force health care providers and practitioners to perform or facilitate abortions. The bishops noted that insurers and employers would also have to help pay for abortions contrary to their deeply held beliefs. We urge our nation to prioritize the well-being of women, children, and families, both with material resources and personal accompaniment, so that no woman will ever feel forced to choose between her future and the life of her child, the bishops said.
Our editorial this week is dedicated to commenting on the statement of the Holy See, warning those in charge of the German Synod of the risk of a schism.
On Thursday afternoon, by surprise, the Vatican, or rather the Holy See, issued a statement on the German synodal way. A necessary statement which has long awaited and demanded by many, but a surprising statement and also a bit ambiguous. Surprising because it comes without signature. It is a statement, says the text of the Holy See. It's not signed by a dicastery, bishops, clergy, doctrine of the faith, or the Secretary of State. It's not signed by anyone, but the fact that it is an official declaration of the Holy See is supposed to mean that it has the authority of the Pope, because only the Pope can publish a document that is of the Holy See. That doesn't mean that it would not have been much better if it had been signed by whoever it was, and especially if it had been signed by the Pope. The important thing about this statement, I repeat, is that it has entered into the problem, into the situation of the German Synod, and that it has entered clarifying some things, although not sufficiently. The first thing the statement says is that the conclusions of the German Synod do not have the force of law. They do not bind anyone and cannot bind dioceses or individuals to put these conclusions into practice. Therefore, It goes against one of the points of the German Synod, which says that it's not a consultative but a deliberative synod and that its conclusions are binding. The second point of the statement says that the Catholic Church in Germany, through this synodal process, cannot approve anything that modifies the structure of the Church or that modifies her doctrine or her morals. It cannot approve anything that makes these modifications if it is not assumed by the whole of the universal Church. Only if these modifications were assumed by the whole universal Church, it would have value. It would have to be put into practice. It's important that the Vatican says that, and it also warns that it would produce a division in the Church. It's a way of saying that it would produce a schism. It quotes a text of a letter that Pope Francis wrote 3 years ago, that one signed by him and which he addressed to the Catholic Church on pilgrimage in Germany. Well, now this one is not addressed to anyone in particular, and in that text the Pope said, among other things, that there was a risk of rupture with the universal Church, that is, of creating a schism, although he did not use the word of creating a national church separated from the rest of the Church. That is quite good, but that is where the ambiguity appears, because he says that he cannot approve anything if it is not assumed by the universal Church as a whole. He takes it for granted. He gives as a possibility that the universal Church as a whole could approve modifications in the structure of the universal Church. For example, in the role of bishops, which is one of the things proposed by the German Synod, or in the doctrine on the nature of Jesus Christ, or in morals, dogmas, among other things, acceptance of homosexuality, the exercise of homosexuality, female priesthood, acceptance of homosexual priests, and therefore of priestesses, and homosexual marriage for men, women, for priests, for priestesses. This is only to cite some of the points, and there are many more that are being debated in the German Synod. The Vatican says you cannot approve this on your own because that would mean a schism. It has to be approved by the universal Church. That means that it gives a possibility, although it does not say it explicitly, that it can be approved elsewhere. Where? In this declaration, the Vatican asked the German Church, the German Synod, the German hierarchy, everyone without mentioning anyone in particular, that these contributions that are being discussed in the German Synod are poured, are made within the synodal process, synod of synodality, in which the Church is introduced. You do not go on your own, and what you are asking for, all these things that I have listed and many more, all that you are asking for, propose it, offer it as a proposal to the Synod of Synodality, and we will see what comes out. Therefore, it remains in the air, it remains ambiguous without clarifying what would happen if that Synod of Synodality or another institution that would be created later would decide to approve those things that today the Germans are demanding, if not all, some. And what would happen if not everyone in the Synod or outside the Synod would agree? If, let's say, the Church in Africa, for example, with so many countries in Africa very strong, with many vocations, with much fervor, or the Church in Eastern Europe, I think of Poland, and not only Poland, would not agree with those things. And in the Synod, instead, by majority, in the Synod of Synodality, some of these requests of the German Synod would be accepted by majority, which is not the only one who is doing them, although they are doing it on their own and given to what they are thinking of approving a legal force. What would happen? That is, does the church have the power to change doctrine and morals? Does the church have the power to say what used to be bad now we say is good? What used to be sin now is no longer sin? It's true that the Catechism says that there is a sensus fidei in the people of God, but that it has to affect, the Catechism says explicitly, to the last of the baptized faithful. That is, if there is one who does not agree, the Church no longer has the capacity to change neither the faith, for example, the dogma of the divinity of our Lord, nor the moral doctrine. This remains in the air and is a really disturbing issue in which this statement should have clarified much more. Besides this, it's also possible to think, some are already commenting on it, that they organized the Synod of Synodality to offer the possibility for the Germans to finish with their synod and pour out their proposals as another national proposal, the same as the Church of France, Spain, or the Italian Church have done. Or, well, we contribute to this collective synod of the whole Catholic Church with our proposals, which are very revolutionary. That is a possibility, that the Synod of Synodality was made as a channel in which the Germans, among others, could express their opinions, their claims, or their desires, and that perhaps some could be granted to them so that they would be content. In any case, the statement says that what is approved in the German Synod does not have the force of law, and that they cannot approve anything that it's not approved by the Universal Church, because it would produce a schism. They cannot approve anything that is not approved by the Universal Church, and there I insist again, there is the ambiguity. Can the Universal Church in a synod, the Synod of Synodality, or in any other way change the structure of the Church, change the moral message of the Church? Can it do so? The Catechism says yes, only on the condition that all the faithful, it says, even the last of the faithful agree, which evidently is not going to happen. The German reaction did not take long. If the Vatican statement was published on Thursday afternoon, a few hours later, on Thursday evening, the German statement was already in the online media, signed by the president of the German Bishops' Conference, Bishop Batzing, and by the lady who is co-president, a lay woman who is the co-president of the German Synod. In that statement, they expressed surprise, and they used another word, irritation. Surprise and irritation. Surprise. Why? Because they say that it's a statement that is not signed. How can it be? And they are right. That is to say, the German answer is going to affect to the weak points, the low points of the declaration of the Holy See. They say, but if it's not signed, if this has never been seen before, a document has to be signed. Who has published it? The Holy See. But who is behind it? Which dicastery? Is it the Holy Father? Why is it not signed? And the German response says that this is not an exercise of synodality. Well, second thing they say, what the German Synod approves is not going to bind any diocese. The Vatican says it cannot bind the Germans. The Germans answer that it is not going to bind. There is also a trap and a dialectical game. Indeed, it will not bind. The statutes of the Synod say so. It will not bind, but it can be applied. It is not obligatory, for example, that the Cardinal Archbishop of Cologne applies it, or that a Bishop of Bavaria or Habsburg, for example, applies it. The Synod cannot oblige him to apply it, but the bishop who wants to apply it, which is the vast majority of German bishops, can apply it. The answer from the Germans, therefore, is an ambiguous answer to an ambiguity of the Vatican declaration. And they say that they are already making their contributions to the Synod of Synodality, but that what they want is simply to make their voice heard in a powerful way, because they have the impression that they are not the only ones who think this way. In short, irritation, rejection, it seems to me total rejection, and surprise for those weak points that they accused them of, that supposedly the German Synod will oblige, and they say that it will not oblige, but that the bishop who wants to apply it will be able to apply it. The declaration of the Vatican, the declaration of the Holy See was necessary, it was urgent, and that is the most positive of the declaration itself. With its ambiguities, it does not have a signature, it leaves open the possibility without specifying how it would be and who or what value it would have for the person or the institution that applies it to be able to carry out those modifications in the dogma or in the doctrine. All this is left open, and the things that are left open are dangerous and should be closed as soon as possible. I believe that once again we have to pray and ask God that what the Vatican statement warns, that there could be a schism if the German Synod decides to approve and implement. Of course, if a bishop decides to implement what the Synod has approved, there is a possibility of a real schism. We have to avoid it, and I believe that the statement tries to avoid this danger. And what we can do, and it's already a lot, is to accompany with our prayers so that this schism does not happen. Until next week, God willing.
If you wish to be up to date about what is happening in our church, you can do so on our news page, www.magnifica.tv. See you in 2 weeks, God willing.